Hi, I'm PJ Partington, policy analyst here at the Pembina Institute. I'd like to give you a little overview of what Canada's emissions trends, the latest report from Environment Canada, has to say about where Canada's emissions are headed. So, Canada's emissions trends is an annual report from Environment Canada, and it's a really important one, and of course, a great example of government transparency. Why this report is so important is we have a number of reports that look at what Canada's emissions have done in the past, and those are very useful to see what Canada's emissions have been doing. But this is the only report that looks at Canada's emissions going into the future, and that's essential if we're going to be looking at whether where we're projected to go is consistent with the commitments that we've made. So the main message of this report is very clear. Canada's emissions are headed in the wrong direction. They're still growing instead of shrinking. And we know, of course, to meet Canada's commitments to fight climate change, they have to be headed in the other direction quite quickly. So what we see on this graph here with the two solid lines is where emissions are headed in Canada and the US under current policies. Now we see for both countries there's been a decline between 2005 and 2010. That's mostly due to the recession, but a couple other factors as well. In Canada, emissions dropped largely due to provincial action like Ontario's coal power phase out. And in the US, there's been a similar ramping down of coal power due to cheap natural gas. So a couple of factors have brought emissions down temporarily. And in the US, we see those are projected to keep emissions going down for a little while longer, but eventually they'll pick up again. In Canada, we're seeing factors that are bringing our emissions up more quickly. So they're projected to go above the 2005 level fairly soon. Now, what we see in the US is they have proposed some policies that they say could put them on track to meet their target. That's the dashed line at the bottom there. So the blue cone shows the State Department's estimation of what implementing the President's action plan would get them. We don't have that in Canada, so there's no, unfortunately, shaded red cone that puts us on a course to meet our target. So the good news, and we see this in this report, is that climate policy can make a difference. We can change the shape of these trends. So if governments are serious about taking action, they can do it and they can get emissions headed down. So we can see this when we look at the projected changes in emissions by province. Provinces like Ontario, with the coal phase out, have taken some pretty serious action, and we can see that reflected in where their emissions are projected to go. So Ontario is seeing a pretty big decrease. Nova Scotia, again, has taken a lot of action in the electricity sector, seeing a drop. Quebec has a cap and trade system. So that's all encouraging. On the other hand, other provinces, especially Alberta, are projected to see a very sharp increase in their emissions. And as we'll see in the next graph, this is primarily to do, or almost entirely to do, with very rapid growth in the oil sands sector. So looking at emissions by economic sector is also very instructive. We can see oil sands clearly standing out as being a major contributor to emissions growth in Canada. Electricity is dropping pretty significantly. As I mentioned, provincial policies have made a big difference. The federal government also has a regulation on coal power that's projected to make a slight contribution. Transportation is growing, but not as quickly as it would have without stronger fuel economy standards that we've seen put in place. So clearly there's a lot of work that needs to be done. The good news is we know that strong policies can make a difference. So clearly strong regulations for the oil and gas sector are critical. There's lots more the government can do. Ideally, a price on carbon, renewables, efficiency, investment in sustainable transportation. If the government wants to get on track, it can.